Okay, Alan, are you ready to get started?
I am.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer DeVito. I'm the moderator for this session. Before we get started, just a reminder to remain muted. The session is being recorded. And today's presenter is Alan Witt from SUNY Geneseo. Alan got his MLS and his MA in history at the University of Rhode Island, which is where I grew up, and is currently working on an MBA from SUNY Polytechnic. He's been at SUNY Geneseo for 4 years and specializes in working with history, political science, and business students. And his presentation today is titled Mission and Vision Creation, Effectively Capturing the Views of Library Staff. So take it away, Alan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this presentation. So just as a general, what we're going to try to accomplish is I'm going to go over the process we put together to capture the mission and vision, go into kind of the approach and the results, and give you all some tools at the end that you can use to either replicate this approach or adapt it. I've set up a Google Drive where I've put various pieces of documentation, and I can add more on request. So let me know if there's anything you would like me to expand upon, and I will happily toss that in. So let us start off with a quick poll. I will toss that into there. Have you led and or participated in a mission and vision creation process? All right, we got almost everyone. A lot of participants, a couple people who haven't gone in, and a couple people who've led them. Okay, cool. I will cut that off. So yeah, it looks like majority have participated in some fashion. A couple people actually led it, and a couple have done neither. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone in this. Thanks for indulging in my curiosity. So our process started in the beginning of 2020 when we were working one fine morning and walked into a danger, do not go upstairs, asbestos sign over our main stairwell, which led roughly 3 hours later to all of our phones activating at once to saying, grab what you can, grab what you need to do your job, and get out of the building as soon as possible. And we found that there was a shower of asbestos throughout the entire building, and we would from then on be unable to go into mill and retrieve anything because it was potentially covered in asbestos. And we're working out of the Fraser building, which at the time was the study hall, so we were basically on tables. So that threw pretty much every plan we'd had for the year into chaos, including the mission and vision. As Jennifer mentioned, I've been working on an MBA, and I had actually been looking forward to the mission and vision process because large portions of my coursework had covered those initiatives, and I had been hoping to be heavily involved in that. So when the director's full-time job became managing the chaos and desperately trying to make everything work, the mission and vision was way out of the radar in terms of important things, as opposed to figuring out what to do with books, making sure the employees were still able to function when we were all shell-shocked. So I volunteered to take the entire process off his plate. I made a pitch because I had a general plan for how I wanted to proceed, and he agreed to delegate the entire process with consultation. And with that, I started the planning process. So quickly, what I encountered, both in figuring out what the capacity we had for doing this, was not quite apathy, but I liked the dead-eyed stare in this graphic. I encountered a lot of potential cynicism. People had talked before about strategic planning. People had gotten burnt out in past attempts. Both workers at Geneseo and other librarians I talked to viewed a lot of this process with skepticism. It was too corporate, too buzzwordy, or the mission and vision wasn't actually utilitarian. It wasn't useful in day-to-day life and our day-to-day work, and as such was seen as just something you do because you have to. So a lot of cynicism, some apathy, and a lot of fears of burnout. People did not want to spend time on this if it wasn't going to lead to something useful when we had so much else happening. And this was even before COVID hit, which also threw, of course, a giant wrench into the works for everything. So that kind of research process and figuring out what I was going to be facing to get this done successfully shaped my approach to how I wanted to do things. Let's take a quick moment here, and I'm going to toss a link into the chat for everyone. I put together a Padlet. So I would like people to go, if you've been in one of these processes or led them, please in the first column in this, toss in what challenges you've faced or seen in getting stakeholders, and particularly library workers, to engage with mission and vision process. We'll be using that later to play around with discussing ways to scale up this sort of approach. It'll be interesting to see because every institution is different. And while you're doing that, I'll continue on. So you can feel free to do that when you have a moment. So because I knew I was going to be facing apathy, very real possibility of burnout, and people really focused on just trying to survive, setting up an entirely new library without books, helping the faculty and the students to navigate that trauma, and then of course leaving entirely due to COVID, and switching again to working from home. I decided to set three main goals for this process. The first one was no burnout, both for the people actually planning it, because we were all workers together and I did not want to add any more than necessary to anyone's plate, but also to the library as a whole. Because we tried broad-based things, bringing everyone together in a room, and it just did not work and degenerated into various forms of chaos. I also wanted to maintain a principle of consensus. Part of what I wanted to do with this was to get a mission and vision that people actually identified with. And to do that, I wanted people to feel heard. This, of course, conflicts directly with the no burnout, because consensus breeds a lot of time, a lot of talking, and time leads to burnout. The more time people are forced to spend on this sort of thing that they're not doing on other aspects of their job, the more likely they are to lose it. And the final element I wanted was majority buy-in, specifically from library stakeholders. We were planning on getting buy-in from as many stakeholders as we could get, but I wanted the library as a whole to firmly commit and to feel that they identified with the mission and vision that we put together, because otherwise it was, again, not going to be useful and not something that we could build on going forward. So I had these three things, somewhat mutually contradictory. So the way I designed the process was to require real but limited engagement, meaning that I wanted people to feel that they had real input, that they were able to see the input they had reflected, but that the actual time any given person was forced to spend on this was minimal, which led basically to surveys as our main mechanism, and then efficient group management for the group to keep them from getting burned out. So it looks something like this. I'll go into more detail, but in brief, team of 5 people. It took us 7 months to complete. For future iterations, I'm reasonably certain I could shave 3 or 4 months off that process, because between asbestos and COVID, that added a large amount of leeway as people were focusing on other things. And without that, this could be done a lot quicker. We took surveys and we conducted interviews wherever possible, where we actually sat down with people, talked about them, and filled out the survey ourselves based on their responses. But people we couldn't get to, we sent out the surveys. Once we had the input, we synthesized it into a coherent whole, came to a consensus, and worked with the director to refine it. So in a bit more detail, for creating the team, I wanted to pull in a representative from each of the larger groups in the library, which you can see outlined there. I served as the representative from research and instruction. And the goal of this was representation. So again, each group could feel that they had someone looking out specifically for their interests, and communication channels, because that allowed us to efficiently contact each group in the library and set up individual interviews without having to meet with a giant group and all the scheduling hassles that entailed. It was the most streamlined structure I could come up with. Once we got our team together, the one arbitrary, well, not arbitrary, but the one element that I didn't do via consensus was specifically defining what mission and vision meant in the context of this initiative. I went into the literature as I was preparing for this, and while there's a general consensus amongst the literature about what a mission more or less is and what a vision more or less is, what they're actually used for in any given institution is very different. Some places, the mission is the driving force for what they do every day. It's something that everyone uses as a touchstone, everyone's memorized it. Other places, it's an outward-facing statement designed for marketing for people on the outside. In some places, it's something that you have because you have to have it and administrators asked for it. And it is designed to placate said administrators. And vision can mean everything from where we want to be in 5 years to where we want to be overall in the entire market to we want to conquer the world to here's a couple of things we want to change. So I wanted to have a very clear and defined sense of what mission and vision meant, because otherwise whatever we put together would go all over the place. And what I came down to was by mission, I meant what we are doing now at this exact moment during this transitionary period. And vision was where we wanted to be at the end of the 3 to 5 year period, because as we were close to asbestos, the administration decided that instead of just remediating their asbestos and then having to renovate down the road, they should do everything at once, because it made way more sense to not have to do renovations twice, which means we are out of the library for about 4 more years probably. So we set that in consultation with the director as kind of the time frame for what we wanted the vision to hit. And once we had those definitions and discussed them and provided resources to go into detail for how they were going to be applied, as a group, we created questions for the surveys to capture the views within those definitions. I provided the surveys at the end of this presentation, figured out how we were going to distribute them, and then went out to distribute them. The actual application of this took the longest time, about 3.5 months, partially because we were still working out how we wanted to do the interviews, and partially because the way we dealt with this is we interviewed the library workers first, then we flipped to having the liaison librarians promulgate the surveys out to their constituents. So I went out to the history faculty and the business faculty in various directions, and got it out to either their deans or individual faculty members, depending on who was invested in giving their input. Our special collections librarian went out to the community and got a good amount of community members who used the library to add their views. The one element we were not really able to get, unfortunately, was students. This was partially just by what was available to us and partly a decision we made because right when we started planning on distributing this, COVID-19 hit. And we judged that the bandwidth the students had for doing something like this was so minimal as they were just desperately trying to adapt to a completely changed landscape that we said, if you can get a student who's willing and you're not going to adversely burden them, then please get their input. But none of the student groups were answering their emails at that point, understandably. So the one downside of this process was that we were not able to capture any student views. In the future, that would be a priority. Once we got our information, we synthesized it. And this is what it looked like. I'll go into the process a bit more, but essentially the Google Forms dumped it into a spreadsheet that we then set up so that we could easily go through it. And this is what it ended up looking like. So the way this actually worked is, it's a qualitative process. We divided up each of the individual questions and distributed them out to our individual group members. And each of us went through the column and basically looked for themes, which answers were fundamentally the same, which answers had the same emotions, the same substantive points. And when we found them, we wrote out a sentence. You can see down here, central point of access for students, faculty, and staff is something that pulled together several statements in that column where people had written similar things. Some said central point of access for students, some said for staff, some said a social hub. But we took those statements and wrote out a kind of statement that encapsulated as many things within the theme as possible. Once each group member had done that and built their little list of sentences at the bottom, then as a group we came together and did the same thing but with the sentences we created. So we looked for similarities between them. That was the color coding you can see down here at the bottom. We simply put everything in green that fit the same general framework, yellow, etc. So we basically doubled the process and condensed things down further. And the goal of this all was to make sure we were encapsulating as many views as possible. So we categorized them both by similarity and theme, and then took that work and synthesized that down into sentences, which would be the bones of the mission and vision. And what that came down to was this. You can see there's various clauses, a lot of commas. Basically, each statement within the commas, each clause in these represents the synthesized elements out of 10 statements or so. We took them, we narrowed them down, narrowed them further in consultation with the director to arrive to this point. But at the end of the day, we were very happy with the results, and on our team at least, we felt that we had fairly captured the information that we had been given. I will go into our results for assessing when we actually assessed engagement as kind of a second later step, but I want to take a brief break here for any questions, either in the chat or if you can unmute your mic and ask. But does anyone have any questions about the process? If you want to take a brief bio break while that's happening, I'm happy to answer them. And we can go on into the actual engagement element.
Ellen, there are some questions in the chat. How did the new mission vision differ from the old?
There were a lot of similar elements, but our new one was a lot more streamlined. The older mission vision was a bit more of a paragraph. And it had slightly different notes. To be honest, part of what we did too is we deliberately avoided looking at the old mission as we were developing this process, partially because we didn't want to be influenced by what we had done before. And it wasn't really that well publicized either. I really can't remember that many elements of it, both because I was deliberately avoiding it, but because it was easy to avoid. It wasn't visible anywhere that I can remember. So it mainly differed in the fact that it was more condensed, focused a bit more on outreach, and the library as a place of connection. But there weren't too many differences. It was more form. And then how negative did the lack of student voice impact our planning? It was more of a morale problem. Part of the problem-solving elements that we put into this were we were very much focusing on the library staff as the primary stakeholders in this, in giving us something to hold on to as we had a new library situation, something to motivate us to keep on working, motivate us to keep on striving, and to give us goals to work towards in the interim period between mill shutting down and us getting a new building. So because of that, and because one of the things that culturally speaking has been emphasized from the top down is a focus on students, enabling students, somewhat paradoxically, that meant that we were hearing from a lot of students about things like the lack of a library space, which we couldn't, a lot of things that we couldn't control. So it didn't really change our planning that much because we were focusing more on the library stakeholders. Next time we do that, that's going to be flipped. There's probably going to be a lot more of a focus on the students because with a new library building, knowing what they want to do with that and how they want to use that is going to be paramount. Whereas a lot of the stuff in our current library building was put together as a, we need to get something done now, top down, quick renovations from the administration, a lot of shuffling things around to the point, and we had just limited space. So the thing student wants, which is study space, we can't give them, or computers. A lot of things we know they want, we just don't have the capacity for right now. That will change when we have a new building. And then why were we doing this? So this was something we had been talking about a new mission and vision because we've been talking about strategic planning. I did this because I went to the admin and basically, or went to my boss and said, I want to do this process because otherwise it's going to get shuffled away. We didn't have really any pressure coming from anyone to do this because everyone was like, you need to focus on keeping your services going and staying strong. I wanted to do this because I felt it would be a morale booster to my colleagues, and because I wanted to actually apply all the stuff that I've been learning in the MBA to justify the time spent on the professional development, and because I thought a vision would be very helpful. I want to have goals to work towards too. And did you find faculty don't know libraries can do things beside books? Our faculty, we have a very strong liaison program. So for those departments where we have a lot of connection, the faculty are very engaged with our instruction and our databases. With that said, I worked with history, and this entire last year has been an especially cruel blow to them because they lost access to our books and they lost access to all archives. It really varies by department. I'm betting the faculty who are in departments that don't engage with us as much have more of a view of books as our main service. But our main route towards educating them, partially initiatives like this and partially outreach through liaison librarians, and some work from the director as well. But the research instruction department does a lot of that work. All right. I'm going to continue on. There'll be more time for questions near the end. So once we built our mission and vision, put it up on our website and promulgated it out to the university, I specifically wanted to see how well we'd done at actually capturing how people felt. And we just tossed together a basic Likert scale. I did some collaboration with some faculty who were more experienced at setting up good surveys to really refine the thing. So a lot of how strongly do you agree or disagree with the following statement, a couple of open questions intended to get a feel for engagement in the process, and a question to check for interest in participating in the future, really more aimed at non-library staff. And I'm including that survey in the Google Drive at the end as well. And these were the results. Blue is strongly agree, red is agree, and orange is neutral. As you can see, we got very, very strong results. Out of the original 43 or so participants in our survey, we had 22 people respond to this follow-up. Of that, we had 16 out of the overall 22 library workers who participated in the initial mission and vision process. So we got a pretty decent spread of the people who actually put their input in. And as you can see, we had one neutral, one person marked neutral, and everyone else was either agree or strongly agree, and the majority was strongly agree. One of the questions I specifically asked was, does my current job functions and responsibilities, are they reflected in the new mission statement? Because I wanted to, again, to have people feel included by this, or they wouldn't identify with it. And again, strongly agree, and a decent proportion did not work in the library. That's the light blue. But overall, this gave me confidence that the process that we put together was very efficient at accurately synthesizing people's viewpoints for what they want, the direction they want the library to go in. With literally one exception for neutral, and even I'll take neutral over an actual disagree. I provided these results to the library director as well on his request, because I think he wanted to know as well how well we'd done in having people identify with us. So overall, this led to a number of takeaways. Creating strong and clear definition for the mission and vision was absolutely essential, because that allowed me to keep the group on task. There were a lot of times that as we were developing the questionnaire, people would kind of veer off course, mostly mission bleeding into vision was the main problem. And that led to my second lesson, which was, as the leader of this initiative, I had to commit to the role of meeting manager, more so than leader of the group in the sense of pushing my viewpoint. I still worked as the representative for research instructions interests, but we operated more or less on a consensus/democracy thing, and I got overruled several times throughout the course of the process, and made sure people viewed me being overruled, because going back to one of my main goals, avoiding burnout, and going through the challenges people faced in terms of engagement. I'm seeing don't believe it matters to them, just another administrative exercise, nothing will change. Feeling the process went inauthentic. There's a lot of people, a lot of you have seen that a lot of these processes feel like they're not going anywhere. And my sense of the reasoning behind that is, the moment the leader of the process or the director listens to people's feedback and then goes in another direction, that's when everyone completely 100% checks out of the process, because that's a sign that nothing will change, that this is not authentic, that we're just going to do what they want to do anyway. Why are you wasting my time? So this might be the hardest in some ways, but because we want our vision to succeed. But if you have a vision that you know you're going to go through, it's better to just have that be the vision by fiat, and then try to bring people on board via other mechanisms. If you're going to have a group process where people put their input, you have to let the majority rule, or go for full consensus, or fail to do that once and everything falls apart and everyone checks out, which is the value of consensus. And with consensus comes the need for a smaller group. If you're going to do consensus, work with a small group. If you're working with the entire group and do consensus, you're going to hit that thing you always get with academics, which is descending into bickering about the placement of the commas. And I'd much rather do that with 6 people than with 22. It's just a lot easier to make sure that everyone's voice is actually heard, which was one of the other elements of being the meeting manager that I focused on. Was there were a couple of our group members who were the quiet ones who don't speak up. And I specifically spent a lot of my time asking X person, what do you think about this? Because they had ideas, and their ideas often moved us in different directions. And some people just don't want to interrupt in these discussions, or want to speak out, or are introverted, and don't feel like pushing themselves out for this sort of thing. So as the manager, getting those voices to be heard is one of the more important elements of this process. The other element was I advocate for actively designing your process, the problem-solving mindset. I've been doing some research for strategic planning, because this process led to me being assigned the responsibility of doing the strategic planning project for the library. And one of the consistent elements I came across was a lot of people went looking through the literature for a process and adopted it wholesale. And I think that oftentimes leads to the feeling of inauthenticity and lack of direction or interest in knowledge about the process. Because if you are going into a process and trying to learn it from the ground up, then it gets to be that kind of that cargo cult mentality where you're doing things because the oracle has said you must do them, unless you personally, the person leading the process, truly really understands the process from the bottom up. It's better to design your own. It takes more time, but the advantage of that is everything in there is for a purpose, prunes out the inauthentic methods, and it allows you to design your mission and vision for the actual reason it's being designed. Going back to Ellen's question about why we were doing this, if you're doing the mission and vision because campus admin has asked you to create a mission and vision, then your goal is to create a mission and vision that will satisfy them. Might be a somewhat provocative statement, but your library workers will be much more happy to participate in that if everyone's clear, under the table or not, that that is the purpose. Because if that's the true purpose and you are trying to sell them on something else, they will, as trained information professionals, ferret that out and then again check out and get annoyed at you. And that's how we get bad morale. So know why you're doing the mission and vision, what you want it to accomplish, and then build the process specifically with those goals in mind. And everything is going to work far more smoothly. In my case, again, it was building morale, giving people something to latch onto as we were adrift in a new building, trying to figure out where we wanted to go, give us something to shoot towards, something we could orient ourselves towards and latch onto. For myself as much as everyone else. And the process was designed with that in mind. And then finally, a couple of points for a library director. If you are delegating the process as opposed to leading it yourself, then defining the powers and scope of the committee directly was very, very helpful. We sat down and talked about, here's what your committee can do, which we were given basically, you can do everything up to the point of the final mission and vision, at which point the leadership team will talk with you and give you some final feedback and advice. And that was enormously helpful because we had moments where there was, are we sure we can do this? Can we make those decisions for the library? And because we'd been given that clear directive from our leadership, we were able to feel empowered. It's a buzzword, I know, but actual empowerment actually works. And we were given the power to do this ourselves. And that really increased our confidence and our ability to do this process successfully. And the other is to set expectations. Particularly with mission and vision, they range from single sentence that's supposed to be memorized to a 3-page paragraph pulling in every single aspect to something that's basically just showing your congruence with the institutional mission and vision. So it's very crucial to, on the outset, set your expectation for length, length, brevity, and readability. And in this case, the library director made it very clear that he wanted something that was short, not necessarily memorizable, but something that was jargon-free as much as possible. Because it needed to be something that could be used both by us internally, but by people outside looking in on us, especially in our new building, to know what we were about and where we were going. And with those expectations in mind, we hit pretty close to the goal. We came with 2 sentences. The library director asked us to condense it down to 1 for each, which we did. It didn't require too much editing. It took us about 1 meeting to condense things down efficiently. But because we had worked with the library director carefully to set up those expectations and the scope, the process went as smoothly as it could in the middle of being uprooted to a new building and then home for the pandemic. So I want to take a moment here for a couple of minutes to set up a breakout session with people to talk both about the challenges you faced and to chat amongst yourselves about ways you could scale stuff like this up, differences in institutions, because we're a very small institution with about 25 or so library workers, including the director. This process might not work at a larger institution. So I want us to kind of talk a bit about that problem-solving approach. How do you use the mission and vision statements? What are they for? And how could you work through that engagement, either as a leader or what process, if you're someone who's been involved in this process outside of the leadership, what would you like to see? This could be very helpful for any library directors or team leaders who are reading this to know what would make the process not feel inauthentic or what would help with morale. So I'm going to activate the breakout rooms, and we have about 27 participants, so let's do rooms of 3 or 4. And I'm going to randomly assign people. So we'll take about, I'd say 8 or so minutes to discuss this, and then we'll break to discuss and do final questions. Welcome back.
I pushed the wrong button and I was talking, and then all of a sudden I saw that we had to come back here, and I pushed the button and I'm back here. So I can't get back to my breakout room, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, they're all closing down in 13 seconds anyhow, so.
Okay.
Raquel, please tell us what you were going to say anyway.
I really like this session. I like the idea of everyone's voices, wanting everyone's voice to be heard, because to have a mission statement and goals and values and completely divorced from what you're doing is really demoralizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of the main things that I really tried to get this process to do, was specifically targeting that problem, because we'd had that in past strategic planning efforts where it had just gone all over the place and everyone felt really unheard. What were some other points that came up in conversation that people really liked or were interested or thought I want to share?
In our group, someone talked about having an outside facilitator for the process that they found was helpful. In their case, the person had done facilitation for the campus a strategic plan, so they knew the culture. And others of us have had experience with, again, outside people who are very well trained. Another aspect was, what happens after you instill this vision and mission. And again, one campus reported that they use that as a kind of a measuring stick for like new initiatives. Do these proposed initiatives meet, the mission and vision that they've laid out?
Mm. Yeah, that's my favorite use for mission and vision is as something you actually can use as a day-to-day. We don't have a policy for this. What does the mission say? And empower workers to make decisions on the fly based on that. It requires a lot more trust in terms of the management structure, but it also really, I think, gives people a sense of purpose. Any other interesting points that popped up? Alrighty. So this was our brief discussion. So let us move to questions and contact information. I am going to, I have a full Google Drive folder. I'm going to replicate this bit.ly in the chat for you all. And it has it basically goes to a Google Drive, which has my conference materials. I'm sure SUNYLA will also be providing those. I like to have a folder I control so I can add things after the fact if people ask for stuff. One of the questions I ran across in bouncing through discussions that I thought I'd address is someone was asking about goal setting, moving out of this. So after this process was successful, the director asked me to run strategic planning as well, which I was sort of angling for, again, because I want to take the stuff I've been learning in the MBA and actually apply it. And we had a somewhat different process. We basically went from the old strategic plan, altered it to fit the new mission and vision, set our goal mark for what we want to accomplish in 3 years now, before the library was finished. And then basically went to every department and asked them, what are you planning on doing? What would you like reflected in the plan? So again, this was a very collaborative thing, and it did not have what you often see in a lot of these strategic plans, which was top-down, here's what we want to do, here's the goals I, as insert director here or leader person, want. Let's see how each of your departments can work toward those goals. This was more, again, that sense of a lifeline. We all set our own mission, we all set our own vision, and then we went out and worked with people to say, and how do you plan on getting to that point? And we're currently still working to firm up that process, where we're just in the final stages of that. So our instance of goal setting, again, reflected that problem-solving approach and was very bottom-up. That may not be the best solution in other cases. If you're trying to move the library in a certain direction, I think much more of a top-down process might be good. I mean, a completely different strategic planning process would likely be called for because it's a different goal set. So the main thing I'm encouraging here is kind of that clear problem-solving mindset whenever you're designing any process, because that will allow you to get to the goals you want. Hopefully that helped answer the question I heard in that breakout. Are there any other questions about the process as a whole, or materials, or things you'd like to see in the materials for the documentation? What I currently have in there is the surveys, both the initial stuff we use to gather info for the mission and vision, and the follow-up feedback survey. But I can potentially whip up more documentation if necessary, if there's anything in particular people would like to see. any other questions.
I have a general question. Are we to that point?
Mhm.
Okay. So this whole process was sort of delegated by the leadership. And so when that's the case and they're not intimately involved in the whole process, how do they demonstrate their buy-in and endorsement of what comes out of the process in an effective way?
In this case, it's partially due to the our unique institutional dynamics. We recently had a change in leadership, and the person who took charge is someone who's worked in the library for years and has the trust, already had the trust of a lot of us. So partially it was just him delegating that authority was their way of saying, we trust you. Other ways I could see that would work, they had final input, and the leadership team, which was both the library director and the leaders of the various departments, sat down with us and went into detail about things that they would like tweaked and the reasons why. So we had a really detailed process where we sat down and talked with them about that, and that helped as well. And they authorized it to be put up on the library website. So I think it's partially our internal dynamics that helped a lot with that. But also just public statements saying, I endorse this, this is where I want us to go, can help with that. And as I've said, this was kind of a unique process built for that kind of ground up thing. So if the library director had, one way I could see working really well, if the library director has a firm vision of a certain point they want to reach, you could set that as part of the scope and the boundaries, and then delegate the rest of the process in shaping the wording and the stuff within that boundaries. And I think that would work really well, because again, that would give people a sense that the library director knows where things are going, but wants people to be a part of that. And I can tell it was incredibly empowering for me to be given control of this process. I was angling for it, but it felt really good. And my team members also felt really good that they built something that people engaged with, and that the director had trusted us to do that.
Thank you.
Any other general questions? Yep.
What's that?
Do you have a general question? Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions or hearing any microphones being unmuted. So I wanted to thank you all for coming to my presentation. And like I said, my contact information is here. If you want to contact me for any further details on this process, I would be very happy to chat with you about this. This was my baby, and I'm very proud of how it went down, and it's really brought us together as a team in the library as well. So it was a fantastic process that I really enjoyed working on, and that's why I wanted to share it. So please let me know if you have any questions, and thanks again for spending the time.
Thanks so much, Alan. Just a reminder to everyone that the keynote and lunch is in Zoom room number 1.